All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. As always, I'm your host, Eric Cunningham. And with us, we have Joe Szymanski, Kraz Granitz, and Dylan Brown this week, all of us here. So, very exciting to have the full panel on this week. But we're going to go ahead and get started here. We've had an interesting week of politics. The picture's not solidified as nationally as we would have liked. It's actually kind of in a strange position right now, as it were. You've got a bunch of weird contradictory polling. You got Democrats spinning at a bunch of races that we don't think are competitive. And we've had a couple of debates this week with some races we're paying attention to. So we'll go ahead and start though with the more interesting or with the less interesting of the bunch, the New York governor debate. There's been a lot of attention in New York lately. We mostly feel this is undeserved. Again, we've heard a lot of rumblings about things. The polling seems to be relatively tight. But just from our own math, we think it's very unlikely that this thing is even what we would consider to be relatively close. That being said, a lot of money is being poured into this race. A lot of money is being poured into upstate New York, 17 districts, 18th district, all of the ones in the Hudson Valley, upstate districts. Even the 25th district is getting money for some reason. The Long Island districts. Basically, the idea here seems to be that Zeldin could do well enough that these sorts of districts would be in play in the gubernatorial race, and you get a surprise result. So what happened in the debate? Not much, although it's interesting how not great Hochul was at debating. One thing that I noticed during the debate in particular was that she would give Zeldin a genuinely tough question that should play very, very well for a Democratic state like New York. Zeldin would just deflect from the question, direct her to something else, and she would take the bait and leave that initial question forgotten. That sort of scattershot debate approach really did not benefit her. At the same time, Zeldin faced a lot of issues, in particular the second half of the debate. His stance on abortion, in particular. His answer on abortion was okay. His answer on Planned Parenthood was not great. And then, of course, his answers on the election stuff, he did not vote to certify the election. All of this stuff was less than good for Zeldin. That being said, I think it's hard to look at this debate and say Zeldin didn't come out on top to some degree. Hochul just kind of came off as very low energy, if you wanted to put it in a Trumpian sort of sense. But we, again, don't think this is going to be too competitive. We think our odds are probably somewhere around Hochul plus 10 to 12, which is more in line with like a 2014 style midterm. I could see it being more like a 10 because in 2014, Mastriano got really good numbers in Westchester County, got really good numbers upstate one Monroe County, but he lost a lot of downstate areas that a Republican will certainly be winning against Kathy Hochul. Staten Island in particular, probably both Nassau and Suffolk counties, I would think, and maybe a little bit of inroads in Brooklyn and Queens, not a ton, but closer to Trump numbers. If that sort of thing happens, that's how you get to a plus 10. But I just want to throw it to the panel here before we get into the really interesting debate. Did any of you watch this? What do you think of it? I don't think it changes the mechanics of this race too much. Again, we're very skeptical of this. We're talking about it because there's not a lot to talk about right now. Surprisingly, no Kansas polls, for example. Yeah. If there were Kansas polls, we'd be talking about Kansas instead of New York. Let's just put it that way.
Well, amazing that there are no Kansas polls.
Yeah, I think what's going on here, and I think I'm kind of skeptical that this race is super competitive. And I think what's going on is a couple things. Is that first, pollsters have had a really bad couple cycles, and I think that creates incentives where pollsters don't want to poll close races. They don't want to poll Kansas. They don't want to poll Michigan. It creates an incentive for pollsters who are a little bit more GOP friendly to get into the average because they can say, look at the last few cycles when we're accurate. It creates a market to be aggressive on the GOP.
Trafalgar.
And Trafalgar, yeah.
Not to I feel like Emerson's getting in on that game.
And you know, the obvious answer, right, is to go poll a state like New York. The incentive is to put your stake in the ground and say, look, we're going to predict, this really unexpected GOP win. That's worked out well for people the last couple cycles. New York's an obvious choice because every GOP consultant ever grew up in Long Island, and it's like the California recall, right? The California recall got a lot of the same kind of coverage. Trafalgar came out with a poll showing Newsom only up single digits on the recall in the last week. He won that recall by 25 points. I don't think Hochul will win by that much, but I don't think it's impossible. This is something like, again, similar to like VA 10, Virginia's 10th district back in 2018, where everybody knew that, Barbara Comstock was a dead woman walking. And the GOP continue to pour money in there because every GOP consultant lives in Barbara Comstock's district. And so I don't know. I'm personally skeptical about the competitiveness of the race. I think it's one of those things where a lot of people who are kind of in the GOP polling consultant apparatus have a lot of personal incentive to really, really, really want to believe it's competitive, and I just don't think it is.
Oh, it's absolutely in the class of South Dakota is going to be competitive, or Oklahoma is going to be competitive, Utah's going to be competitive. Like,
Democrats have actually done a better job of not falling for this stuff this cycle, but in the last couple cycles, like there were numerous races like this where Democrats just like really, really wanted to believe they were competitive.
Like the Devin Nunes race.
The Devin Nunes race.
Lindsey Graham.
The Lindsey Graham race is actually a very good example of this. And Democrats done a better job not falling for that this cycle. But like,
except Marcus Flowers.
Yeah. But like the idea though that like the idea that, the consultant and polling class has like an interest in certain races being competitive so they get more attention than they probably should is like not a new thing, I don't think.
Yeah, I have to agree with Kraz on that. And I think you just have to kind of look at, Eric has done a very, very good job of making this point. What actually has to happen for Lee Zeldin to win is just such in the range of unlikeliness and like improbability that it's like you can see massive swings in Long Island and central and upstate New York. And it still only gets within I think what was it, Eric, 7 or 6 points?
Yeah, let me pull up the article here because I did write an article about this, and I did the math in the election shuffler, which you can use to do this yourself. I didn't just go off presidential, by the way. I went off of the 2018 election numbers, which I think are a reasonable barometer for what you can see this year in terms of turnout. So I modeled it off of that, and if you look at the races right here, so start out. Give Democrats or give Lee Zeldin the best of everything. Give him the best upstate, every county except for Erie, which is not going to go for Lee Zeldin. It did go for Carl Palladino by almost 20 points, which again is not going to happen. If you give him every county except for Erie, the best margins any Republican has seen over the last decade, that moves this thing by a 21-point win to a 17-point win. Not a lot of people live in upstate, about a third of the state. Again, you're still losing Syracuse, you're still losing Ithaca, still losing Buffalo, still losing Albany. These aren't terrible numbers, though. I did not include Westchester and Rockland counties because those are not upstate counties. Next, suburban swing. Shift all the suburban counties 10 points to the right, and New York City 20 points to the right. Again, this is basically Republicans win Nassau, they win Suffolk, they win Rockland County. They shift 10 points in Westchester, which is increasingly college educated and increasingly not elastic. And you give them the best case in New York City. They go from losing this by like what was it, 77 or 72 to 22. Trump got 22% of the vote. This gets them to 32% of the vote, a third of the vote. That's better than George Pataki got in 1994. That is actually better. He got 27%. That still only gets them within 7. You can shift this. You can shift the suburbs and New York City an additional 20 or 10 points. So you shift New York City 30 points. You shift New York City or the suburbs 20 points. That still only gets you within 1.5. Basically, what would need to happen for this race to actually flip, not just be competitive, actually flip, is you need to get Lee Zeldin getting 35 to 40% of the vote in New York City.
Not going to happen.
Yeah. Again,
just the baseline. If on stream that night, if that happens, if Lee Zeldin ends his final numbers when the ballots are counted in New York with over 35% of the vote in New York City, I will eat a hat.
Even then, 35% as a baseline, he still needs to do everything else. He still needs to swing back in Westchester County. He still needs to win Suffolk and the Nassau counties. He still needs to do probably better than Molinaro upstate. He needs to be winning upstate by 10 to 15 points. Like, it is a lot. It's a lot that needs to happen.
Also, and why this is so hard, and I think one thing that listeners should be aware of, just for this election especially, is I think that you have to think about this election is probably going to have pretty high turnout, right? Mm-hmm. Not as high as 2020, but a lot of estimates put it at least at 2018 levels, right? So pretty high. And the thing is that when you have really high turnout, the closer you're getting to the electorate simply reflecting the last presidential election. Mm-hmm. And when you have high turnout, that means that all the gains that a party gets have to come from persuasion, right? So when we say Zeldin has to improve by, 20% in this or that county, we're not saying that, this is a low turnout special election and he can rely on Democrats not showing up. If we think New York is going to be pretty high turnout, he basically has to convert 1 out of every 10 voters to go from voting from, Joe Biden or Andrew Cuomo to voting for him, right? And I think that this is one reason we've generally been skeptical of some of the more outlandish polls this cycle, is that we think there's going to be high turnout, and we could be wrong. But I don't think the evidence shows that even if we are wrong about there being high turnout, that the GOP has like some massive turnout advantage. And so I think,
none of the early voting shows a massive Republican advantage.
Well, except Florida, but
Florida's Florida.
But in most cases, I don't think you either see very high turnout across the board, or you see relatively even turnout, even if it's lower, like in Nevada. And so I just think that we've been skeptical that, you're going to see people like Lee Zeldin, who really has not run this campaign very much as a moderate, somehow converting.
Yeah, because frankly, he's not credible as a moderate. Like
converting 1/6 of all Biden voters in the state of New York to vote for him, which is just like a crazy number to think about.
Yeah, if Moralino were the nominee again,
Molinaro,
I'm sorry, I would find this
Can't believe
whole
you hate
thing
Italians.
slightly more credible. What?
Can't believe you hate Italians like that.
Yeah. Well, here's another way to think about it, right? I've seen people compare this to Virginia. And Virginia was an 11-point Biden state. So think about New York.
I thought it was only 9.
It was 10.
It was 10. So
Split the
think
difference
about
between
this.
10
Think about it
points.
this way. Virginia has far fewer voters than New York, but it's also very different in terms of composition than New York. The vast majority of New York's population lives in either New York City or the suburbs. Very small position lives in rural areas. I'm just doing math real quick here in DRA. So just taking all the counties here, let's consider, and this is probably going to be roughly inaccurate, right? Because there's a lot of different areas in Virginia. But let's just go ahead and say like classify things like 3 different types of counties. You've got core urban counties that go heavily Democratic. You got suburban counties, which can go anywhere from competitive to Republican to very Democratic. And then you got rural areas. So again, this is going to be slightly inaccurate because Virginia has way too many cities. It's got way too many of them. I don't think this is a controversy. Look at the composition here for this. So basically, you got these core urban counties. You got DC direct area. You got Roanoke. You've got Albemarle, Charlottesville. You got Richmond, and then you got these other counties right here. These went Democratic in the presidential election, 72-26. They're less Democratic than New York City. You got these direct, shiny suburbs. These go to Democrats by about 13, and they go to Youngkin by about 1 point. And then you got the rural areas, which again, these are not all rural. These go to Trump by about 13, and they go to Youngkin by about 34. The rural counties that I've roughly qualified here are the largest portion of the population in the state. They're bigger than these core urban counties. They're bigger than the suburbs, and Republicans did better in the suburbs. So that's Virginia. I'm going to do the exact same thing to New York, and it's going to be a lot easier because New York actually has a lot more counties you could classify as core urban.
Well, and also the other problem, I mean, like Zeldin could overperform like Youngkin did, and he'd still lose by double digits.
Yeah,
right. Like the problem here is not that, like, I mean, first off, even if you like buy Zeldin's crossover appeal, whatever, like he would have to like double like Glenn Youngkin's overperformance, and like I just don't think, like, this is where also kind of the consultant polling class thing comes in. Like, I get that crime has been an issue that has hurt Hochul, but I feel like the degree to which crime can swing large numbers of voters might be kind of overestimated by, like, polling people and consultants.
Again, it's just such a difficult set of circumstances. Even the circumstance I gave, it's not just even in a world where Lee Zeldin is getting 40% of the vote, 35% of the New York vote in New York City. That's still not enough to guarantee a win. He still has to pull those margins upstate, where Hochul is actually from. He still has to pull those margins in Long Island. He still has to pull them in the suburbs in Westchester and Rockland counties. Rockland's not as big of an issue for him, but Westchester, very big issue for Lee Zeldin. It's such a difficult difficult scenario to work with that I just don't consider it to be extremely viable.
Yeah,
You can shoot us if we're wrong. I'll eat a cricket on stream if I'm wrong. I would
You
like
guys
to be
really
wrong because I'm a Republican, but like, it's just not an extremely viable scenario. So like, so here's the other one. Here's the New York's, and again, this is again very rough. I've classified New York into 4 categories because New York is a little bit different. So you've got, oops. So here in New York, you've got New York City, 8 million people. This went to Democrats 76 to 23. That's really bad. These suburban counties, these are roughly as Democratic as Virginia's suburbs. Then you got these additional upstate urban counties. These are, Rochester, Buffalo, Ithaca, Albany. Oh, I actually forgot to move one of them. Syracuse. There we go. Biden plus 21 of these counties right here. And then the rural ones are Trump plus 7. This is your problem right here. Look at the biggest front of the population is New York City. About half the population. These counties right here, it's not a realistic scenario. Now, could we be wrong? Sure. If we're missing a realignment, we can be wrong. If there's an actual realignment going on, which you usually cannot predict, we would be wrong. Can you predict a realignment? No. I believe you cannot predict a realignment very easily. You can sometimes see signs coming, but you'd be lying if anyone in 2016, serious academics were telling you Trump is going to get within 2 in Maine, or Clinton's going to be demolishing Republicans in places like Orange County. Like, that's a little bit more predictable. People didn't see the other side of it. It's really difficult to do. Like, I don't know. I don't see it in the cards.
I'm curious what you guys think. This has been bouncing around my head for a while, kind of a hot take, so I'll pass it around the stream here. That kind of has to do with it. We've heard a lot about like, oh, Zeldin's doing so much better now. Like, if he overperforms, he might drag some Republicans in the House races across the finish line. How much do you guys buy my hot take? My hot take is this: that when one candidate of your party improves at the top of the ticket in a non-presidential race, so for example, Zeldin, it has minimal effects on the other people, on the other candidates of your party down ballot, unless that top of the ticket candidate is bringing out new voters who wouldn't have voted otherwise. My thinking is that, I'm not saying there's nobody like this exists, but my thinking is that it's hard to believe that if Zeldin, let's say, is down 10 in a district and the Democrat is also up 10 in that same district, that if Zeldin converts a bunch of Democratic voters, they will now also jump to the Republican House candidate.
I think it depends. I think it depends on the region.
I was going to say this too. I think it depends, and I think it's different in New York specifically because so many of these, multiple of these upstate seats are open seats. I'm thinking specifically the 22nd and the 19th. Both of these are open seats. They have there's no incumbent there. And I think I would argue this on Long Island too in the 1st district. I think there's probable cause there to believe that possibly Zeldin boosting the top of the ticket would help those Republicans there. I think it is severely less effective in races where there are incumbents. So I don't think this will help the Republican in the 18th or 17th. I don't think this will help a Republican in the 4th district. Or I think the 25th is very much just a nonsense district. I don't know what the hell's happening there right now, but it sounds like a lot of nonsense.
So here's the way I would put it. New York is actually different, in my opinion, because it has a history of Republican elected officials at the local and county level that do very, very well divorced from the Republican Party. And when you get voters who already vote for a lot of Republicans at the local level, take, for example, Nassau County. This is a Biden plus 10 county. This is a county that does not go to Republicans at the federal level for a very long time. It's not gone to Republicans since 1988. Republicans have been stuck at about 45%, 46% since 2004. It also has all of its elected county-wide leaders are Republicans. It is a Republican county commission. It is a strong history of electing Republicans. I could see a Zeldin performance in Nassau County correlating with Republicans doing better in districts 3 and 4. Another example I would give is the 25th district. We actually have a concrete example of this. 2014. Rob Astorino won Monroe County in 2014. He lost the 25th district narrowly by about 600 votes. At the same time, Louise Slaughter, in a race that everyone had rated as safe Democratic, nobody thought Louise Slaughter was going down. She won by about 900 votes. Monroe County is also a county that has a history of electing Republicans. They've had county executives. I think right now their county commission is the county legislature has a Democratic majority, but one of those Democrats caucuses with the Republicans, which gives the Republicans a majority. Basically, in New York, you have a lot of people who routinely split their tickets in upstate New York and in Long Island. Where I don't see this working is Westchester County, which is a lot of college-educated voters who used to vote for Republicans like Rob Astorino, and then after Trump were like, no, I'm never voting for a Republican again. That is the difference. I think it's trickier there. Well, but like, as far as district goes, the 25th, I don't think the 25th is a terrible stretch district. I just don't think it's going to happen.
I don't know.
Slaughter, like, here's my question though, right? Like, yeah, Slaughter and Astorino's margins, or Slaughter and Astorino's races correlated, but is that because like people who would not have voted for the Republican in Slaughter's race voted for the Republican after Astorino convinced them to vote for him? Or is that just because the makeup of the electorate that came out that day in that district was, was basically even, right? Like there's like, I don't know how to describe it, but like you can't really do a controlled experiment, right? Because you don't know how people, you don't know exactly the sequence of how people think. But like, I'm just thinking about like an example in Pennsylvania, right? Where like Mastriano arguably is doing worse than his polls were when he first won the nomination, right? Like he was down 5 back when he won the nomination. Now he's down like 10, right? He has done worse. Shapiro has improved his numbers since that time. But in the same time span, like John Fetterman has started doing worse, right? Like Shapiro improving his numbers has not magically made a bunch of people convert from going from voting for Dr. Oz to voting for John Fetterman. So like, I'm just not sure that there's like.
I think Kras has a good point because I've tried to make this point. Governor's races are weird for whatever reason. There seems to be still a lesser polarization effect in governor's races than there are in Senate races. My question is, and I think this is a legitimate question, is if people believe that the Republican running against Schumer, right? It's some no name, Joe Pinon, whatever the hell. Yeah. I think that might be his name. If he can do better, people are saying they believe Pinon can get to 35-40%. If he can do that, then I would say there would probably be a small correlation there that, hey, this group of voters has changed a little bit. Some of them who voted for Biden in 2020 are just really, really pissed off and are showing their middle finger basically and are saying we're going to vote for Republicans in 2022. I would say at that point, then we can argue that, I think.
I can't see Schumer's opponent getting 40%. I just can't see it.
I can't see it either, but some people are saying it could happen. And if it could happen, I don't think it'll happen either. But in the range that if it does happen, again, if we see Chuck Schumer fall below 65%, we're talking about Republicans getting victory maybe in some House seats that I would say back in late August, early September, around Labor Day, we didn't necessarily see them doing so well in. I think that would be my argument there.
See, I think there are just some Democratic congressmen in New York who are just uniquely vulnerable, specifically Sean Patrick Maloney seems to just be uniquely vulnerable. Good job carpetbagging and kicking Mondaire Jones out of his district.
Yeah.
I would say kicking out Jones, who had a relatively good relationship with the Hasidic Jewish community in Rockland, for Maloney.
I mean, for me, I actually buy the Maloney numbers a lot because you don't have President Biden going to the Hasidic Jewish community there and being like, going to the rabbis and being like, you have an open line of communication to me. He would not be doing that if they were not in trouble.
No, I buy the Maloney weakness. Absolutely. Not just because he might be the only Democrat I'd be okay with losing.
Yeah. But again, I think we've been on with New York for a while. Let's go on to Pennsylvania because I think that's a really interesting one. I'm going to guess a lot of people on Twitter watch this debate. A lot of people in general watch this debate. And the general consensus from virtually everyone who has seen the debate is that John Fetterman did not do a good job. This was known ahead of time. This was expected. The thing is, I don't think people expected it to be this bad, right? There was an idea going into the Herschel Walker debate in Georgia that he would just put on this embarrassing performance. And he didn't. He wasn't great, but he wasn't terrible. There was this idea that Joe Biden would when he would debate, he would be just the worst debater ever, and he wasn't. For that matter, Trump. People were really concerned that Trump would be a terrible debater. He wasn't great, but he was not abysmal. Fetterman is probably the single worst political debating performance I've seen in my life, and I don't say that lightly. This was it was somewhat difficult to watch at points. It was just not a good performance, and it was something you could probably see coming in hindsight. But it also is kind of divorced from Fetterman's rally performance, which again, those are not great. But at rallies, he seemed much more in sync and.
I think it's a different environment.
This.
Yeah, that's an environment difference there.
I mean, I've been very frustrated by all the discourse around this. I've only seen parts of the debate. I have a piece I'm doing, and I'm gonna watch the whole thing then. But I've been frustrated by all the discourse because, yes, of course, a recent stroke survivor is not going to do as well in what I think could be fairly described as a competitive speaking environment. That's just not going to go well. I mean, that's just a reality. I mean, I get why it had to be done. He had to go debate, and I'm glad he debated. I think it was important for him to show that. I think it was important for him to get out in front of this. But I don't know. I'm just surprised by I guess, I don't know. I think people are both overreacting to the debate's importance. The point I was going to bring up with Hochul and Zeldin, but can bring up here just as easily, is debates don't matter, really. I don't think that this is going to affect voters all that much. And I don't know that it really should. I mean, Fetterman is not a good speaker with the new challenges.
He wasn't frankly, he wasn't a good speaker before the stroke. The debating was never his strong point. Even his team admits this.
Yeah, I mean, and of course he's going to have added difficulties after a stroke with auditory processing issues and speech delays. That's just going to happen. So I don't know. I'm confused by all of the dooming from Democrats in Pennsylvania, like Schumer. Well, not Schumer, actually. I think it was Rendell.
I think it's a matter you have to have watched the debate.
I think if anyone should speak, I should speak on this here. You know, if you look, I think the concern from Pennsylvania Democrats, and I'm looking specifically here at Ed Rendell's reaction, is that I think the concern is those who do watch the debates, and I will point out that because the Phillies ended their championship series in 5 games, that meant there was suddenly nothing on that night, on Tuesday night. So I think the concern here is that those who did watch the debate, who were potentially mainly composed in the educated suburbs of Pennsylvania, where the Oz team is really trying to target voters, and the Fetterman campaign knows that they are probably losing some of the voters there from the Shapiro camp to the Oz camp. They're probably suburban voters in those Philly collar counties that are going to split their ballot for Shapiro and Oz, or no gubernatorial candidate in Oz, or whatever. And I think the concern here is that those, again, very educated, who politically involved, not necessarily politically involved, but politically, trying to think of the right word here, politically, not necessarily involved, but they're
aware.
Politically informed, politically aware. I think, politically aware, I think, is a good way to describe them. Who would go and watch this debate on Tuesday night, and they did not see a good performance. I think that undeniable. I think the fracking answer specifically is in bad look. I think that is a clip that I don't know if it's been clipped yet. But I think that is one that if it is clipped, that is one
That-
is. I'm surprised his team did not prepare him specifically for that. Like I would say, if there was one issue that I would have prepared him specifically on, I would have been fracking, because he has made I think maybe even more so than Oz on some on some key issues. I would say Fetterman on fracking, he has made maybe one of the biggest U-turns on comments on from running a statewide campaign. There were many comments made before this cycle from Fetterman on fracking that very much dissuade from his positions in prior years. And I would have been like, that would have been the key one that I would have been prepared to have at least some sort of a due diligence answer on. And I think the way that went and the way that can be clipped, and maybe this doesn't matter. Maybe fracking just isn't that much of a concern to those politically aware, highly educated voters. But the way I think in that he answered it, not necessarily the content itself, I think is the way people could be concerned about that, because that might have been the worst question of the night for him, I think, in terms of how he answered it.
I actually think it was the second worst. I think it was I'll say it at the end, but I think it was the second worst answer he gave.
I think I think there are two things that are. I see people in the chat saying yes, debates do matter sometimes. I think there's an argument to be made that it matters here, but the reason I don't think it matters here, and the reason I don't think that clip will actually be used, Joe, is I think there's no good way to clip this for the Oz camp, because if you clip Fetterman speaking slowly and if you clip the speech issues, you're going to be rightly accused of attacking somebody for their disability. You're going to be attacking them for their speech issues after a stroke. I think that's a problem for the Oz camp. Because
I'll push back here and I'll say that I think it's the second part. I think it's the second part where he's pushed on it. You can clip his previous answers he's given, and I think I think you can clip the second part where he kind of stumbles over it, and I think it's that stumbling over it, where that could just be an answer where I think you could see an unexpected performance be happening. Like the question was the push was unexpected, and then someone kind of just stumbles over it. I think the way that happened, that is what gets clipped, not the full answer. I don't think the full answer wasn't good in my opinion, but the second part, the pushback, you can clip, his previous answers, previous statements he's given on fracking. You can clip the second part where he stumbles, and I think you can make the argument that's just him not being prepared. That's not
sure
the stroke. I agree with you. They can't go there. There's a limit where they can go super hard on this, because there is a line that has to explicitly be towed. That maybe if this was just him and he just had that answer, that you can't go all out. I totally agree with you on that, because there is a tough line that has to be towed here. However, I think to say that they can't do it, I think is a reach. I think these are very creative people who make these ads, and I would not underestimate their ability to do so.
Yeah,
sure.
I don't think we have TV ratings for this debate yet either, as far as I know. They haven't put anything out in terms of how many people watched it.
Do you mind if I make one other point? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Please.
I think there's the issue with the discourse is that nobody's doing what you're suggesting, Joe. Nobody's attacking the lack of prep, or none of what I've seen is. It's all that he stumbled over his words, that he didn't sound great, and he didn't. He sounded like a stroke survivor 5 months after a stroke. I think if you want to attack the fact that, he didn't have a good fracking answer. Yeah, he didn't have a good fracking answer. His team didn't prepare him well. And I don't know why his team didn't prepare him well. They knew this debate was going to be a potential flashpoint for the cycle, and it seems like they just neglected the job.
Well, they didn't even prepare ahead of the debate in time. After the debate, they were blaming the closed captioning, and then Nexstar came out and said that they only did one of their 2 rehearsals. They were given a chance to have 2 rehearsals with the equipment. They chose to only do one. I just think the team is not very good.
It sounds like the team failed him in this case. I don't know.
And I think that's a fair criticism to have, considering where he is at health-wise. I think that is a fair criticism to say that the team failed him more in this case maybe than the actual candidate himself maybe would have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean, I think there's an important point about how the public is going to view a disabled candidate here. I mean, I think
Mhm.
I don't know how it's going to be viewed because we only had one poll and it was an online poll and of the debate
Yeah.
performance, and I don't trust those.
No,
But
you shouldn't.
I
But
think the reaction is going to be a lot less doom and gloom, and I think it's going to be less lopsided than it was on Twitter.
Let's look at it this way, right? I think when people are looking at a debate, they're looking for moments or they're looking for things. Most of the time, debates don't matter because nothing of interest happens, right? If like Catherine Cortez Masto and Adam Laxalt are debating, you know exactly what's going to happen. Adam Laxalt is going to be the Republican. She's going to be the Democrat. He's going to say his stuff. She's going to say hers. And unless one of them has a royally terrible gaffe, it's generally going to come out where whichever candidate you watched and liked going into it are the ones you're going to support afterwards. Where this is different is two things. One is obviously Fetterman's positions. That's where the fracking stuff matters. That's where some of the other answers matters. The moderators pressed him a lot on specific issues in ways I would not have expected going in. Not necessarily fracking, but they pressed Oz too. But like there were a lot of times where Fetterman was pressed on a policy position and he didn't have a very good answer for it. The second is, of course, the fitness for office thing. And yeah, this is a difficult area with a stroke. I do think if his team had been upfront from the beginning about what this was and what it entailed, a lot of this would have been blunted. Because you look at the start of this, there were no issues. The team said there was not any issues long term. It's not a big deal. You had the doctor signing off on it. They didn't mention it until 2 days after. This entire time, that's been an issue. And then in the middle of the debate, he's asked why his medical records aren't going to be released, which he could give a normal answer for that, which is you don't normally release medical records for a Senate debate. That doesn't happen. Senate candidates don't do that. He didn't have a very good answer. I think regardless of whether you like it or not, the fitness for office question is where it's going to matter. And it's very difficult for me to imagine someone going into this debate, being undecided, looking at this and going, unless they're really sympathetic with Fetterman's stroke for whatever reason, looking at this and going like, I think Fetterman is really is really competent for stand for office. I think he's going to be doing a great job and he's not going to have any issues whatsoever. That is probably the worry for Democrats. And that's why so many were saying afterwards he shouldn't have even debated. They should not have even done this.
And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
Yeah, but I think the reason why debates, they can matter. I don't want to say they never matter. I just think the reason they matter less than they used to, I think a lot of people's perception of how debates can matter are it's seared in their brain from when Michael Dukakis couldn't answer whether or not he would kill his wife's rapist during the 1988 debate or something.
Yeah, I don't think we got that moment.
But the problem is that one is that even on gotcha questions like that, the issue is just people just don't watch that much TV anymore. Live sports are a bigger moneymaker than ever, and less people as a percentage of the population watch them than ever. Right? That's an example of there's so many options of people to watch. Joe was saying the Phillies weren't on. Probably added some viewers to the pool, that Pennsylvania Senate debate. But when sports aren't on, people watch Netflix. And when they're bored of Netflix, they watch YouTube. There's just this whole thing where it's debates are the only show in town.
I would counter to at least a certain extent that this was live streamed on many of these certain channels, and there was live streams on YouTube and stuff.
Sure, but even to that point, I'm just saying I think the reason debates maybe don't move the needle as much as people expect anymore. And I think it's not just viewership and that live TV viewership has declined across the board. It's also, think about the numbers, right? If you have 100 viewers, just using an easy number, 100 viewers turn into a debate, right? And we know from polls that about 10, anywhere from 5 to 10% of those people, so 5 to 10 of those people are undecided, right? They don't know which way they're going to vote. And so, if you have 100 people watching and let's say 10 of them are undecided, then you have to think how many of those 10 people watching will have their mind, will decide based on what they've seen, right? And then of those people who decide based on what they've seen, how many will then stick with that decision all the way to election day? So like that's why in 2016 and 2020, Trump's debate performances didn't help him like at all. He actually lost ground every time he debated, but each time it was like he would lose 2 or 3% in the polls, and then he would rebound after a week or two because the number of undecided voters tuning in, who happen to usually be lower information, is not that high. The number of ones that will make a decision based on the debate is even lower, and the number of ones that will stick with that decision once they make it is even lower than that. So, like, that's why debates are hard to move the needle in a polarized environment.
But I would push back on two. I would push back on 2 points there. One is that I actually think people understate how much regular Americans watch TV, and by regular I mean like boomer age Americans who like they spend more. The average American spends more time watching television than the average MMO player spends playing an MMO. Like you think of like someone who's playing
the average MMO
all day.
player. The average MMO player is not the guy holding the 2-liter Coke bottle under the desk. So
no, right, but it's like it's a lot of hours a day. The average American watches it like 6 to 8 hours of television a day. It's a lot of television. The question is what they're watching. The second I push back on is again the gaffe moment. Yeah, the Trump debates didn't matter too much because he never had a career-ending gaffe. You know whose debate performance did matter? Rick Perry. Because he said he was going to end 3 federal agencies, could only name 2 of them.
Yeah,
like stuff like that, like something that's so terrible of an answer. That's where things could end. That's where you're, or the Chris Christie nuking Marco Rubio in 2016.
Marco Rubio's performance, Marco Rubio's presidential campaign was dead before that.
No, it was that was New Hampshire, right? This was ahead of New Hampshire. This wasn't ahead of South Carolina. So like. I think it really did matter. I think that I can say, looking back on it, it did matter.
All the ones you're bringing up, the reason Trump didn't have a career or race-ending moment in the presidential debate is because I just don't think it is. I literally think it is impossible to have a gaffe so bad it decides a presidential race. The examples you bring up are primaries, which are inherently less polarized because they're primaries.
But we're talking about Senate races too.
No, I know. I'm saying
Kraz is right though here. Kraz is right here. In that this is a different population. Here, I think I'm probably split in the middle between Eric and Kraz. I don't know what the hell's going on here. But anyway, the fact is that, look, this was a hyped up debate because of the question on how Fetterman was going to look and how he was going to perform. That was a question that was brought up. No matter, I understand why some people are upset about that, why they don't like how that's been performed. But the fact is that a lot of the job that is done right now in the Senate is debating and voting. Fetterman can vote. The question is, how well does he debate? Before this, it was already not very good. After this debate, it has been proven to potentially be worse. Will that affect things? I don't know. The fact of the matter is that this Senate race has become increasingly tightened since mid-September. Since mid-September, this has been a race that has increasingly tightened, even as the governor's race has become farther apart. Again, my point that I made earlier, governor's races are, for whatever reason, still inherently less partisan than these federal races are. Maybe because it's a state race, maybe because more low info voters pay attention there because it's a state level race and they think it affects them more. I don't know. But either way, will this in the end matter? Who knows yet? We don't really have any polling yet from post-debate. We really don't have a whole lot. There's a couple of our leading pollsters. Throw them on the average with what you win. This is also, let's remind ourselves, unlike I know people in the comments are bringing up Terry McAuliffe. The Terry McAuliffe debate happened, late September, early October. If I'm remembering the gaffe correctly, it happened I think late September. That's a whole ass month to run ads with what McAuliffe said. That was a whole month to run ads and change. What I will say, I think the Fetterman camp did a very good job of is making sure that this debate was late. This debate happened with 3 weeks to go until the election. That is not a lot of time to change them.
Yeah, people were already voting. People were already voting.
People are already voting. I also want to mention that is mostly mail-in voting. We do not have any early in-person voting in Pennsylvania, which is stupid. We should have that in exchange for no excuse mail-in voting. We shouldn't have the no excuse mail voting. We should have the early in-person voting. And I think it would be very, very good. But my opinions on that, I digress. The fact of the matter is, I don't think necessarily either of those who have done the mail-in voting, most of those people probably would not have their opinions changed by this debate. I wanna make that very, very clear. This is not absentee. This is not in-person early voting. This is mail only only early voting. Those people who do that, 98% of them would have not had their opinions changed by this debate anyways. And I would bet it would be the same percentage for those who are going to do the mail-in voting through these next 2.5 weeks.
Wait, are we getting a governor debate? Are we getting governor debate in Pennsylvania?
No, because Mastriano refused.
Well,
So-
that's when you're down 10, the best play is to not get on TV.
Yeah.
I mean, no, look,
That
you're
has
missing,
been
you're
the
missing the
strategy
wisdom.
so far.
You're missing the wisdom of
I haven't finished here yet. I'm not finished yelling.
I have 2 points after that, if you don't mind.
But yeah, that's fine. But, look, this debate, in the end, the question is, did it change the mind of a significantly statistic enough population in probably like the Philly suburbs, Lehigh Valley area that said, in this, again, what I expect to be probably a race 2 points in either way, to change the debate so that way it favors one more than the other? I can't say that it does. I have seen no proof of that yet. I think this is, again, there is a certain, I said that he did bad. It was not a good, it was probably a maybe worse than I expected debate performance from John Fetterman. Do I think that was maybe enough? I can't say. I don't live here in Pennsylvania enough because I have to go to school out of state. I have to move. I have to pick up my shit and I have to go back down there. So, I don't know yet. We'll see. At this point, it's kind of just a let the votes be counted type thing. I don't know if it'll ever be declared. I'm sure people will say it is if Oz wins. I'm sure we will have pundits saying that the debate was where the change happened.
Yeah,
But it wasn't.
I can't say that it was.
no, what you're
I
missing
can't
is
say.
what you're missing.
We're going
is
to go to
the-
Dylan, Eric. We're going to go to Dylan.
So, sorry, 2 points. You mentioned, Joe, at the beginning that voters see the two jobs of a senator as voting and debating on legislation. I would push back on that second point. I don't know that voters really know what the job of a senator is beyond voting. I don't know that voters think, oh, the job of a senator is to get on the floor and debate their colleagues on legislation. Genuinely, I don't know. I don't think they do, by and large. And I also don't know how much that matters. The votes are decided before they come to the floor anyway, generally. Second point is to compare with McAuliffe. As far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I missed it. There's only one moment that's being clipped out and put on TV, and it's not any of Fetterman's gaffes, from what I can tell. It's the Oz abortion thing at the end. And will that matter? I doubt it. I mean, Oz's position on abortion has been known since the beginning of the campaign, but I just think that says something, that it has yet to be announced what is being clipped at.
Should we throw this to early vote numbers? We can do some run
Yes.
Yeah, go right ahead. Yeah, you lead on. You lead on that one.
So we got some early vote numbers coming in. I've repeatedly told people to not read too much into these. I think that they're kind of a mixed bag, to be honest, right? Like in Pennsylvania, I think you see Democrats exceeding their numbers from 2020, doing better in terms of turnout rate and raw share of the votes. But if you look at a state like Florida, Republicans are crushing Democrats in Florida. I think one of the reasons why these returns can be so hard to parse through is because you don't know whether the missing voters, whether the increase for one party is due to genuine increased turnout, or if it's due to one party's voters waiting to use a different method of voting. So like this comes in where it's like John Kuvion, who does early voting analysis on election Twitter, and he's a pollster, said, Florida's a disaster for Democrats because they're doing way worse by mail and, they're doing way worse in early voting as well. And that might be true, but to illustrate why this is complicated, If you think that Florida is going to have lower turnout and that it's going to have lower turnout because Democrats won't show up, and these numbers simply illustrate that Democrats aren't showing up, all this makes perfect sense. But if you think Florida is going to have very high turnout, and we've heard that many people think Florida is going to have very high turnout, then you have to almost think mathematically that this lack of Democratic voting early means that much more Democrats are waiting till election day. The reason being you can't have near presidential turnout while also simultaneously having much more Republican electorate in voting by mail and early voting and
define near presidential, because like last time from 20, because we had a very, very above average presidential election in 2020.
2016.
Let me look at the president. So presidential turnout in 2020 was really high. It was
67%.
Yeah, 67%. 2016 was 56. 2012 was 55. 2008 was 58. So, like, what are we thinking of here? Closer in the 58% range? Or
I was thinking close. Well, I was going to say that I've heard estimates for closer to 2020 than 2016 for some states, depending. But if you think that, right, you have to think like it's just not mathematically possible to have it's not mathematically possible to have 10 million votes in 2020 and 9 million votes in 2022 and have there be like every single batch of the electorate is much more Republican. It's just not possible. Like, so you have to temper your early voting analysis with analysis about turnout. And this is what John Ralston has done when he analyzes Nevada is he says, look, Democrats in terms of percentage, in terms of votes, have a pretty solid firewall in Nevada that they're building right now. But, turnout looks a lot lower than many analysts expected. And so then the question becomes, well, if turnout ends up where analysts expect, then you have to think election day turnout is going to be much bigger than maybe people expect. And so you have to temper your analysis with analysis about turnout. If you just take the early voting numbers at face value, you're going to be arguing that mathematically impossible things are going to happen. And so that's why these are sometimes tough to analyze.
Well, and there are reasons to believe, especially like in Florida with the mail-in ballots, that Democrats are going to vote in person more. COVID is not as much of a top of mind concern anymore, so there's less incentive to stay home and quarantine.
I will also note this might be a demographic thing. Like when you look at 2020, the places where Democrats actually did okay in person on election day voting is places where Democrats' base is predominantly Black and Hispanic voters. The reason why 2020 was like the upside down was like in past years, it was always conventional wisdom that vote by mail was a Republican leaning vote method because it was all old white people and like younger and non-white voters didn't vote by mail as much. And so like the problem is that on election day, you might see something kind of out of whack where it's like in Georgia, for example, in 2020, election day was like a super white, super Republican electorate for the most part. But if you consider that before 2020, election day votes were actually much more diverse, much younger, right? And that 2020 was, Democrats are much more motivated by fear of COVID to stay home and vote by mail or vote early. You might see kind of bigger shifts in states where the Democratic base is non-white Democrats. So that's why actually I think that, for example, Democrats are matching their numbers matching their 2020 vote by mail numbers in Pennsylvania. I think that's largely because the Democratic base in Pennsylvania is not non-white voters. It's like it's more educated white people. And so that's where I think like that group might stick with vote by mail, but I think you might see.
I want to point out that my literal parents have stuck with vote by mail.
Right. So I guess what I'm
forcing my sister to stick with vote
what
by
I'm boiling this down to is that I think that educated white Democrats, even if they didn't vote by mail before 2020, have largely stuck with vote by mail. But I think that
I would strongly agree with that. I
think that non-white Democrats who did not vote by mail before 2020 are more likely to have switched back to voting in person.
If you look at Virginia too, I would point this out. If you look at Virginia, some of the highest vote by mail returns because they have VPAP, and VPAP is one of the greatest modern election tracking services to ever be created. The places where vote by mail is the highest is by far and away the 11th and 8th districts, which are based in Arlington, Alexandria, Falls Church, small city, but it's independent, and Fairfax. 8th is Arlington, Alexandria, and then parts of Fairfax, and the 11th is now all Fairfax. They have by far and away the highest vote by mail numbers and return rate. Kraz, I want you to guess which district has the lowest.
The 9th, right?
No.
Oh no, you're talking about return rate, not number.
Return rate.
Oh, 4,
3.
3.
The third, because I want to point out the 4th takes in some still relatively white parts of Chesterfield and Henrico and of its south side areas. The 3rd district is not majority black, but it's like 48% black population. It's Portsmouth, Norfolk, Hampton, Newport News, and the northern part of Chesapeake City, which has more black population. That has the lowest return rate of by far, and it's by a pretty wide margin too, of any congressional district in Virginia right now. And I think I again, being someone who transfers from his wonderful home here in Lancaster County, it's nice, quiet, and calm here compared to whatever the hell Nova is. I can tell you exclusively that those rich white people in Nova are sticking with vote by mail and early vote more than they ever would have without COVID. I 100% agree with Kraz here.
I love mail-in voting. I would like to stick with it, please.
We don't really.
I'm not surprised, of course, because it makes a whole lot of sense for you, Dylan.
Yeah, it's very convenient.
I just voted in person because my voting center is like a mile up the road from me on weekdays, and so I just went there early voted Friday.
Am I going to be the only election day voter in this group?
I usually voted on
because I can't be home.
I usually voted on election day, but like it's literally up the road from me, and I'm pretty sure if I voted on election day, I would have had to drive to.
Well, so it's funny. Early voting, Duke actually has an early voting station on campus, so all the kids can vote back home in New Jersey. It's for North Carolina. But
I won't be voting. I'm in New Jersey second. I don't have a competitive race.
No, but in all seriousness, like I think that like for me, it's more just like I just think election day is fun. Like I like waking up on.
Oh yeah, there's a fun aspect.
Like it's very fun. Like last cycle, I drove my girlfriend back to Pennsylvania to vote the night before, and then woke up at like 7 a.m. to drive her to the polling place, and then like it's just like it's fun. And I don't do vote by mail because when I was in college, I remember the postal service was so notoriously bad in college.
Which is why I'm home this weekend.
It was
they didn't accept my new address, and I had to come home.
I don't know if people in other college towns have this experience. Like I don't know if Boone is like this or whatever, but like it was bad. Like I remember my sophomore year, I tried to vote, and the post office told me that I said, I have to postmark my ballot by election day, keep postmarking my ballot. They told me, yeah, it's fine. Repeatedly. And then I got a letter from California saying your ballot wasn't postmarked. We didn't count it. And then when I lived in an off-campus house, like the postal service was so bad. They used to deliver the wrong packages places. They never took our mail. Like I was just like, no way. I was just like, no way. So I voted early in person last time, but I'll probably go election day this time just because it sounds fun.
In Boone, it was kind of weird. I didn't vote in Boone. I voted back at home. I split time between Boone and my home county. I just lived in my home county. It didn't really matter. You're in the same district and everything.
Right.
But there was a fight for years between the city of Boone and everyone else in the county over whether or not there should be an early voting center in the Plymouth Student Union. So basically, here's the thing. The city of Boone, the people in charge of the city of Boone do not like college students. And they specifically don't like college students getting involved in politics because it means less power for them. So this is an issue where the Republican groups in Watauga County that were Republican student groups and Democratic student groups were in broad agreement that there should be an early voting start on campus. And the county, which is controlled by Republicans, but was broadly against there being an early voting start on campus, because if there's an early voting start on campus, it means more students are voting. They're voting in the city of Boone. It's less likely for city of Boone candidates who are the wealthy groups there to win, and more likely for candidates backed by students to win. So that was the big conflict. They only added the student voting site after I left campus. I think it was either after or right during, but it was genuinely a struggle for like 5 to 10 years because everyone on campus was like, "Give us a voting site," and the county was like, "No," until I think the state stepped in and said, "No, you have to do this." It was strange, to put it simply.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. So my long diatribe on early voting numbers is that I think someone mentions about more Republicans are voting in states like California. I think return rate of ballots is not a terrible metric to look at. Like that's my take on this is that like if you look at the return rate of ballots, it's not terrible because that's more akin to like just turnout rate and it's normalized. It's normalized for the fact that people who have chosen to not vote by mail after doing so in 2020 usually don't request ballots. And so it won't lead you wrong to think that a bunch of voters have dropped out of the electorate when they have not. So Republicans have improved on return rate in lots of different states. They've improved on return rate in California versus 2020. They've improved on return rate in Florida versus 2020. The only caution I will give with this is that in 2020, a lot of states mailed a lot more mail ballots to a lot more voters. And in a lot of cases, Republicans got those mail ballots and then as the election approached, took partisan signals to not return them and to go vote in person. And so I would just caution a little bit that the return rates for Republicans in 2020 might have been a little bit deflated versus where they would have been if it was not that states were sending a lot of mail ballots to a lot of different people. Oftentimes making it easier to get one. And so that's like the one caution. But I think that overall return rates are not a bad metric to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the early voting shows either side is super favored yet.
Well, I think you'd have to know turnout, right? Like in Nevada, for example, Democrats have a bigger like firewall is what they call it in Nevada right now than they did in 2018. But of course, most people expect turnout to be higher than 2018. So like you have to know what the turnout is going to end up being to understand how to read that. And so, you know, it's always tough. And yeah, so I'm not sure that any of the votes point to like any definitive outcome, which kind of makes them useless. I think that some people have tried to say they point to something definitive, and I don't really agree with that. But
I think the problem is people are looking for something more helpful than the polls because the polls have been just really
Very
strange.
What you're not excited about another Texas gubernatorial race poll showing a high single-digit lead for Greg Abbott?
No, I'm not excited. I also don't want a South Dakota poll. Please, I don't need to see Kristi Noem up 20 again. Look, I would like a Kansas poll, please.
No, you're gonna get another poll for Tennessee's gubernatorial race because this is what everyone is asking for: the difficult questions.
And I don't need to see another poll showing Mary Peltola up between 5 and 15.
Because yeah, I don't think if she wins, she'll win by 5. I don't think that's a plausible outcome. I think it's going to be very, very close.
I mean, she got the Murkowski endorsement, so
she got the Murkowski endorsement, but I think everyone was going to vote for Murkowski for the most part. Was pretty much going to vote for her, or a good chunk of them, when you consider the brunt of Murkowski supporters are actually Democrats.
Yeah, but that Democrat is still getting 16% in that race, though, right? Like,
yeah, it depends.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with I don't want to go into Alaska too much, but Democrats in Alaska have not won the majority of the vote in a statewide race in like 30 years. I somehow doubt that all of a sudden Peltola is going to win by 15 when Democrats have not even been able to hit 50% of the vote.
Is unreasonable.
No, I don't think you.
In fairness to Democrats, though, in Alaska, that state has 3 statewide races you can get over 50% in. It has the congressional race, it has the gubernatorial race, and it has the Senate race. And for decades, Ted Stevens had a lock on that Senate seat. The gubernatorial
but even in 2008, they didn't get in 2008.
Yeah, but it was still Stevens running, and they needed a scan. Like they weren't going to win until the FBI indicted him like a week before the election. And Don Young had a lock on that House seat for 50 years. Like obviously, the Democrat was getting a majority there. So in fairness, Democrats in Alaska, like yeah, they haven't gotten a majority of the vote in like 30 years, but that's also partly because the only race where they like plausibly could have was like maybe the gubernatorial race, and that always had like weird independence and shit too.
No,
So-
the gubernatorial races though they do matter. Like we have seen outcomes. I think you have to look at a predictive outcome. I don't think all of a sudden Alaskans are gonna be like, you know what, Mary Bartola likes fish. We're gonna give her a 10-point win.
It's just weird to me
No,
how much
um,
crossover support she seems to be getting versus like every other Democrat ever. Like it's weird to me.
Yeah, I
It
think
is
I
funny.
would be very surprised if she wins by more than 5. And honestly, I would have kept it
Sure.
a toss-up. Personally, I think that the leans Dem is probably what we would go to. I would not be surprised at all if Peltola wins, and if it's one of those leans Dem seats that every forecaster has his leans
It
Dem.
is a leans Dem seat. The fact I understand the questions, but fuck, Canada quality matters, guys. You know,
It does matter.
Canada quality matters.
does
and
matter.
Nick
It depends.
Begich
and
is not
the
as
problem
good as
is that
Tom.
Nick Begich, because he now is getting the shit kicked out of him because he did some questionable things to the Don Young people, and you have to understand when you do that, people are going to be very mad at you for that because they were very loyal to this man.
Well, say
And people are going to be very, very upset at you if you tried to screw him over.
But to be fair, I would say that Don Young, his total was declining. He actually did worse than Trump and Sullivan in this last election. There have been a lot of bleed. So, like, I get what you're saying. All I will say is that looking into Alaska, going deep dive into Alaska, if this is a situation where the Senate Leadership Fund is still putting money into Alaska because they want to shore up Murkowski, if Murkowski is within 5, like, I would be really surprised if Peltola wins.
I'd be shocked if she's within 5. Like the reason I would be surprised if she's within 5 is because if you run that primary through ranked choice voting, obviously they didn't do it because it was for the top 4. But if you run that Murkowski primary through ranked choice voting, I think she wins walking away. Like I don't think it's particularly close.
Really?
I did not.
Because
I
let me
didn't
look
mean
that
for
up,
this.
actually.
I
What?
did not mean to get us into an Alaska tangent.
No, but sorry. I just I remember this very well because Murkowski's first returns looked pretty bad, but she ended up leading. I'm gonna butcher her name, Miss Kelly over here. She ended up
Shibaka.
leading what? Shibaka. She ended up leading Shibaka by almost 7% when it was all counted. And so, like, if you really run the ranked choice voting on the minor candidates, change it probably not very much, and then you get to like the other Democrats and Republicans, and like I think Murkowski wins it, not like probably by like 10%, like I think solidly. And like a primary is where you have like the most loyal partisans coming out, and so like I think that I would be surprised if Murkowski loses because I think that given what we saw in the primary with a pretty hyper partisan electorate because it's a primary, I think she has a solid lead in the first ballot, and I think she walks away from there.
All I'll say is I have my reasons for thinking this. So I could be proven wrong on election day, but I have I just am continually just looking at the history of this. It's like if you're looking at history for like New York, for all these other states, all of a sudden the idea that you're just going to be, especially if this is a wave, which we don't know, Democrats are spending like this is an R+7 year. I don't think it's an R+7 year.
Yep.
If this is anything close, if this is R+5, like you're talking about needing to overperform the top of the ticket by 15 points.
Why the hell
That's the challenge. That's the challenge. And yet Alaska is weird, but it's not that weird. It's weird in predictable manners. Again, I've looked into Alaska a lot. I've written multiple articles on this. Alaska is weird in predictable ways. And what I mean by that in particular is Alaska, Democrats don't do very well in Alaska. They've not done very well in Alaska pretty much ever. They have a limited coalition which relies on them picking up support from either having independent candidates as their candidate or requiring a lot of Republican voters to vote for the Democrat, which Peltola is the type of Democrat that would work with. It's the challenge is that it is a very, very red state still, 10 points, and it's just a challenge. It is a challenge for Democrats to win in the state. And I know there's so many Democrats who are like, we're going to win Alaska. We're going to win Alaska. It's like Alaska's the future Democratic state. Just looking into it, you need to. It's the same thing with the Utah stuff to a degree, where Democrats are really confident, like in their long-term fortunes in Utah. I'm like, there are signs of a good thing, but you actually got to start when your only path to winning is relying on the other party fracturing. It goes to show the strength of your party. Again, we'll see. But if this is R+5 or R+7, I really would struggle to see Peltola winning by a large margin.
I feel like we don't know, obviously, because the polls have been really weird.
Mhm.
But I feel like R+5, R+7 is an unlikely result at this point.
I'm not so sure. It depends on basically what you're looking at. If you're looking at generic ballot, there's so many garbage online sample polls that are just terrible. You have Republican pollsters, which are, of course, showing Republicans winning by large margins. Who would have thought Rasmussen polls would show Republicans winning by a wave margin?
Yeah,
Or
I like.
Who would
Trafalgar
have thought?
showing them
Who would have
up
thought that? Who would have thought that Big Village would have Democrats up by 4?
So the only thing I will say about polling, we had our new poll bias tool come out, which
Yeah.
obviously everyone on this stream should go check out. But I think
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting that it's kind of a catch-22, right? If you think that the polls in 2020 were really bad and only
Mhm.
Trafalgar and Rasmussen had it right, they got the secret sauce, they know what's going on.
Oh, you're forgetting about Barris. You're forgetting about Barris. That's the one the populace really loves. They love Barris.
Yeah. So if you think that, right? If you think those pollsters are genuinely more accurate because they purposefully diverge from the conventional wisdom on how much the GOP is getting because the conventional wisdom underestimates the GOP, those pollsters make up a much larger percentage of the polls in the average this year. And the reason that's interesting is
Mhm.
because if that's the case, then you should also expect the polling bias to be much lower, if that makes sense, right? If you think Trafalgar and Rasmussen are way more accurate, and they make up a larger percentage of the polling average, then the polling average has to be more accurate. It can't be that you can have a massive polling error and simultaneously have Trafalgar like being the main driver of the polling average. That just like wouldn't make any sense
Mhm.
unless it's a polling error in Democrats' favor.
Yeah, I don't see, like, I don't know. I don't see it, but we have no good indicators right now. I feel like we're flying into election day basically blind.
Oh, we're absolutely blind. All I
Yeah.
can say is I'm just getting a bunch of really weird indicators from this that are just extremely conflicting. And I know that you should not take Democratic spending in these districts seriously. At the same time, it is baffling to me that Democrats are spending money in New York 25, they're spending money in
What-
California 26, they're spending money in Washington, and they're not showing up their opponents and their candidates in swing seats, and they're basically making no push into Trump seats.
Wait,
That
Eric,
is
are you
really
telling me
strange.
Eric, are you telling me that Democrats are panicking right before an election?
This is unusual panic. Going into 2020, they were super confident. You had the ridiculous DCCC poll showing like Joe Cunningham, beat Nancy Mace by 13 points. Like you had that sort of nonsense. I just I don't know if they're stupid. I don't know if they're seeing something, or I don't know if there's actually. It's just strange. But yeah. Regardless, we should probably go ahead and wrap this up. I think we've had a pretty good talk here. Do keep in mind we're going to be. Oh, so do we want to announce this week, or do we want to wait until Tuesday to hint at what we're doing?
What are we
Well,
doing?
we're doing it Monday.
What are we doing?
We're doing it Monday.
No, not the ratings change. The other thing.
The other thing we're also doing.
We're also
Monday.
doing that Monday.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we wanted.
What are we doing Monday?
We're doing the pick'em.
Yep. We're bringing back our
Pick'em
election
is
pick'em.
back.
So if you're a longtime Elections Daily follower, back with us in 2020, back when we maybe had, what was it, 5,000 followers?
4,000.
not-
We didn't hit 5,000
Yeah.
until post.
Yeah. So we had a political pick'em contest, which was basically just if you want to put your wits to the test. We have a list of races. We're going to put over under on them. This is not gambling. This is not betting. This is not predicted. Just casually putting your guesses in, and whoever is the most accurate, we're going to be shouting out. We're going to shout out the most accurate person, and also we're going to be looking at the statistics to see how our followers did on the whole. Pro tip: in 2020, our followers did not do extremely well, but also we
Nobody
didn't do
did.
extremely
Okay,
well.
nobody did.
So
Our problem in 2020 was that we tried to make the lines so that we would get even action on both sides, which is usually what like Vegas does when they make lines for sports games. The problem with this was that the conventional wisdom was way too low on Republicans.
yeah,
So it just meant that if you just bet Republicans on every single pick, you
Yeah.
won, which is what happened. The person that just
we had
bet
Iowa at
Republicans
1.5. We had Iowa at Trump plus 1.5.
So
Like,
so yeah, that was bad. So now instead what we're doing this year is we're trying to make the most accurate lines possible. We're hoping that our lines get as close to the actual result as possible. We have some somewhat surprising ones on there, and we have a couple of fun prop bets as well. So
mhm.
hopefully people like it.
Yeah, we're expanding it this time. Again, keep an eye out for this Monday. We have a ratings update coming up Monday. We're going to be thinking of, we got some changes we're going to be making. We're probably holding off a little bit on the major ones until midweek because, again, we're just waiting for something, although we're waiting for nothing for the House polls because they aren't coming.
Well,
Everyone is too busy. Everyone is too busy polling Texas. Stop polling Texas. Poll Kansas.
Wait, are we going to get a final House poll? Or final
No.
Seltzer poll?
Oh, they never
No,
put out the AG. They never put out the AG number.
No, they did.
Okay, good. Yep. So regardless, stay tuned for those. With that, we'll close off this episode. Thank you guys for watching again. Like and subscribe to our show if you like what we're doing, whether you're watching us on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, wherever, podcast providers. We really appreciate your support. We're going to be obviously streaming election night. We got some fun details to show you of that. We've got live election mapping this time. We got some really cool stuff we're going to be doing, following up on what we did in 2020. Just
in fairness, we also had it last time. We got banned from Twitter. We were
big tech censor us. But thankfully, Elon Musk is in charge now and will not ban us.
Hooray! We might not get fired.
Let's go. No, I actually saying this in the chat. I'm kind of worried that when he says he's not like everyone who like there's no bans anymore, I actually think what he means is, oh, don't worry, I fired all the people in charge of bans, but the ban algorithms are still running, which is kind of a problem because it means we can get banned with no one to appeal it to.
Wait, are you telling me that Elon didn't think something through?
I just think I'm a little bit afraid the algorithms are still running and we would get banned and have no person to actually talk to. Like no one's in the office anymore.
This is what you call a Pyrrhic victory. But yeah, again, keep in mind for that. Stay tuned for all this. We're really excited for that. We're excited to bring you some more stuff in the future. But yeah, with that, thank you guys for watching. We'll be back next week. We're going to try to do Friday again. If not, I'll be Saturday. And then you can join us in a couple weeks or less than a week and a half for our election stream. So thank you guys again, and we'll see you next time.